Hello and welcome back to the Audible Finish, our weekly show discussing the week gone by in the world of wrestling. I'm your host, Dimitri Kalos, and alongside me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, Thanasi. Hello, Thanasi.
Hello, and happy to be here.
In this week's episode, we review the events from WWE Smackdown and Raw, including the signing of Randy Orton to the Blue Brand and Drew McIntyre's slow descent into a monster villain. Are we potentially on the verge of a Drew resurgence? We'll look into that very soon. Later on, we'll also talk about what happened in AEW, including the TNT title match between Adam Copeland and Christian Cage in Montreal. If you are enjoying the podcast and have a moment, please like, share, and subscribe. All right, on that note, Thanasi, let's go straight into SmackDown. Do you want to take us through your discussion points about the Blue Brand?
Sure thing. Well, we opened up the show with the women's war game fallout or backlash, and frankly, it just made it seem like war games didn't even happen. We have the same hate, the same aggression. All the baby faces want a piece of damage control, and this just seems to be a function of making the story about Becky and Charlotte at War Games because now we're back. Becky has returned to Raw, and now we're just gone back to the same people not having had their blowout at War Games as they should have. So in the main event, eventually, Bianca defeated Kairi Sane with the kiss of death. Um, but certainly, I think that it just feels like this storyline didn't progress. Really, it just kind of like felt just like a spillover from War Games. Do you agree?
Uh, Wholeheartedly, 100%, completely, grammatically. Yes,
Spiritually.
it was. I think it was something that because we watched this SmackDown together, and it was something that I think we're both feeling is that they just had a War Games match. There should be finality to it, and it felt anything but. Especially when the opening segment is the baby faces coming out and going, "Oh, I'm ready for a fight." Let's get into it. It's like, well, hang on, you were just supposed to have this hellacious match. That was your opportunity to let out all this anger you have for each other. And I think unfortunately it's symptomatic of the smaller roster they have on SmackDown. So they can only have so many women going at it without being able to give breaks and offer new opportunities to other talent.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Just moving on, I'll just before I get to the next talking point, I'll round up the two matches that went down in the first hour. So Lashley defeated Butch after a spear in a singles match, and then Santos Escobar defeated Joaquin Wilde. But as we headed towards the middle of the show, roughly the top of the hour, we had a Logan Paul promo. So this is his first time appearing since having won the United States title. And he announced that he's going to be having a tournament, which is going to be commencing next week or this weekend for us. And the participants in this tournament to determine the number one contender are Santos Escobar, Dragon Lee, Karrion Kross, and yet to be unnamed NXT talent, Bobby Lashley, Grayson Waller, Austin Theory, and Kevin Owens. So it was a big F and KO comes to shut up Logan Paul, and he says that Paul being in this ring is a nightmare, which I think for all the wrestling purists, frankly, does have at least a semblance of truth. Kevin Owens took on Grayson Waller, so it doesn't seem like they're going to be paired up in the first round of the tournament. And during the match, Kevin Owens hit an awesome frog splash off the apron and to the outside. And of course, Kevin Owens does end up winning, but it's via a roll up and it is clean. But the focal point, Dimitri, that I wanted to discuss here is there is a notably absent participant from this list of 8, and that would be LA Knight. I think it's safe to assume then that they're trying to have Logan Paul go over someone in his first defense, and then potentially for a subsequent defense, he would come up short and then lose to LA Knight, potentially WrestleMania. I think that's where we're heading. But I was kind of thinking about the possible pairings here, and I'm going to ask you as well what your opinions will be. But I think that my assumption is that initially you go babyface versus heel, babyface versus heel, babyface versus heel, and babyface versus heel, all in the first round. However, I did manage to get wind that Karrion Kross and Bobby Lashley are going to be facing each other in round one. So that's a heel versus heel fixture. Do you have any other thoughts on how they're going to structure round one on this division?
Well, it's interesting that you put a focus on that because that is a fairly appropriate concern that I had as well, which is, you're not structuring it in a way in which we have an absolute person to root for. Although I guess Bobby Lashley, you could argue, is more of like entertains the audience type heel compared to Karrion Kross is just outward.
He was getting a lot of
also.
cheers against Butch.
He
A
was.
lot.
And I think it achieved the opposite effect of what they were hoping for on that night, which was to try and give Butch some attention. And I think it did anything but, unfortunately. But I also wanted to mention, I think the other match is Santos Escobar versus Dragon Lee. And did those two not... Is that the other match? Or am I confusing it?
I'm actually, frankly, I'm looking for it right now, but I think it's Santos and potentially the NXT talent.
Oh, okay, well then that would change my concern. My concern was that it was going to be Santos Escobar and Dragon Lee, and the two just had a pay-per-view match. But if it is, okay, that's good then, because that would alleviate the other concern I had. Overall, with the tournament, they did that thing where they give you the person that you'd expect to win to just come outright and talk shit with Logan. And in that respect, it kind of makes me less interested in seeing the outcome eventually, because it's like you're not teasing it appropriately.
Like a foregone conclusion now. We know that Kevin Owens is going to win.
Well, that's what it feels like. And if it's not him, then great, but it feels like it might be. And at this point, maybe the other alternative is to give the NXT call up that surprise win in the tournament.
Do you think it's likely to happen?
I don't think it's likely to happen, but it would be something that's fresh, and it would and then having that person then challenge Logan Paul, you can argue the idea of they're not quite ready yet, and it gives Logan an easy defense for the first time. Whereas if he goes up against Kevin Owens and say successfully defends, it does feel a bit like, well, now you've beaten two legends of wrestling, and it feels like a bit awkward.
I do hear you. I think the inverse of that is by putting him up against an NXT talent and putting that match on pay-per-view, it's almost as if you're saying that for this US title, it's very prestigious United States Heavyweight Championship, that you've got one developmental and one part-timer. So it just feels like it might be taking that there's a trade-off there, right?
For all we know, it might not even be on pay-per-view. Their next pay-per-view is Royal Rumble. For all we know, this might actually happen before then, because there's what 6-7 weeks until the Rumble.
Do you think Logan will actually wrestle on TV?
It's possible. I'm not saying it's likely, but it is possible. But okay. We'll see. We'll see how it progresses.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we've already recapped all the matches, but the final talking point from SmackDown comes from the main event segment, where Randy Keith is deciding his new contract or his new brand allegiance during the main event segment. And in trying to convince him, Adam Pearce offers him a world title opportunity, and Nick Aldis offers him the Bloodline, which in fact, it is this faction that makes the decision for him by attacking him. And after LA Knight makes the save, it is confirmed that, as he puts it, Daddy is back on SmackDown. RKO signs off on the dotted line for the blue brand, and Roman Reigns is in his sight because he's looking off at Paul Heyman with blackness in his eyes. And of course, for his troubles, Nick Aldis cops an RKO out of nowhere as he lifts up the arm of the Legend Killer. Kind of like, it reminded me a bit of the stunner rule, right? Where at any moment, at any time, to any victim, you can hit the stunner.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's the big talking point. I was getting Batista vibes almost, frankly. As you recall from 2005, after Batista won the Royal Rumble, one of the big questions was, where's he going to go? Who's he going to face at WrestleMania? And it's good to see that his former Evolution stablemate had a similar segment to it. But do you think And do you think it is the right call to put Randy Orton on SmackDown, or do you think he's better placed on Raw? Because my view is that there's already enough star power on Raw, and it's actually a better move to put someone on SmackDown at this point in time.
Well, that's the way I feel about it, especially if what we think is going to happen is that Punk will go on Raw. I think it's a good idea to keep them separate, at least for now. You know, as you said, share the wealth of the star power on offer. And as we know with SmackDown, its biggest star in Roman is not there most of the time now. So you kind of need someone else. So I do think it works and should be a good match. A match full of trash talking.
Trash talking indeed.
And I think they're setting that up for the Rumble. And what I think could be interesting is if they play off this idea, because LA Knight isn't an out-and-out babyface. So I wouldn't mind seeing some conflict on his part with Randy in the sense that they both want a piece of Roman. And I hope this doesn't happen, but it could even potentially be a triple threat for a winner.
You know what? I actually wouldn't mind a triple threat because it would allow for a little bit of jeopardy, a bit of a change in the story as far as Roman doesn't actually have to lose. He can just be a victim of the challenger pins challenger. So I think that actually might be a good way to go, frankly. But overall, that's our SmackDown recap. So back over to you, Dimitri.
All right, well, let's now move on to this week's Raw. And this week's Raw, I felt like the most valued player from this episode was Drew McIntyre. So that was my main discussion point. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the opening segment and match that he had, and then as well as his interference in the World Heavyweight Championship match following that match. So he opens it up and he went with this bit of verbiage where he says, it feels like everyone's lost their mind recently, liars, hypocrites, cowards, just plain idiots. And he says, apparently you can get fired, released, leave, do what you want for a bunch of time, come back to the company, and you're instantly forgiven these days. And obviously everyone sort of interpreted this as a bit of a dig against the one and only CM Punk. What did you think about this opening little bit of his promo before we even get to the stuff with Sami Zayn?
Look, I'm going to give you a very, not a generic, but a general rule here. And that is when you say something on a live microphone in wrestling and you're going to say A, B, and C, the audience knows that this is a fictional universe. But if you say A and the audience knows that it's real, they're going to believe that B and C are also real, almost as if they think that you're shooting from the hip. So I think by using real life criticism of CM Punk on a live mic, it actually makes for a lot better of a story, in my opinion. Making these kinds of references. Now, the sad thing is that Drew McIntyre is absolutely right. Like, you can definitely leave the promotion. You can be as unprofessional as you want because it creates controversy. And then the controversy creates cash. And then the cash creates that motivation to bring you back. It happened with Matt Hardy, happened with plenty of other people. Scandals create attention. And drawing attention to scandalous activities is a good way to get attention to yourself. So I think with Drew McIntyre, he made the right move for his promo.
Well, then after that little bit, he goes into the main part of his segment, which was basically airing his frustrations against Jey Uso, getting the opportunities that he's getting, essentially talking about how he hasn't forgiven him, nor should he. And this is the reason, obviously, that he was clashing with Sami Zayn. The two sort of exchange words and then have what I felt was a very good opening match on Raw. And I wanted to briefly talk about a little bit about this spotlight that is being put on Drew right now. And I sort of am raising the question of, are we on the verge of a Drew resurgence? Because it feels like he's getting more attention. He's being put in a position where he's not a flat out babyface or villain. And he's sort of just being allowed to be himself and sort of be opportunistic. And I think that this is potentially going to give him lots of room to really put a focus on him, especially amongst all these other stars.
Look, I think for me personally, the way that I see it is that having him in a tweener role at the moment is probably not the best position. I think this is my personal opinion because it's just it feels like fence sitting. And what does fence sitting get you? Sore ass. Because we don't think of Drew McIntyre as inherently a morally ambiguous character. We either think of him as like a strong baby face or a very, very vindictive heel. And I think that for someone of his caliber, that the biggest way to propel him forward is to go all in with a very, very heelish attack and actually embrace the hate. That's my opinion of it. So I would very much like to see him go full-blown heel, very aggressive, very mean. That's the Drew that I want to see.
But is that not what we're on teasing? Is that not what they're teasing now?
We're on the verge of it, but I want to dive in because it feels like they've been a bit half-assed about it so far.
Okay, well, the big question is, because I think we agree on the Verge part, that they're on the verge of something. Now, whether or not, the bigger question is...
It might not be a heel turn necessarily.
But are we on the verge of him becoming popular or becoming a crowd favorite, or perhaps becoming the next Dominic Mysterio in terms of heat?
Well, I think that's only the case if he goes down the heel path. As far as like crowd favorite sort of thing, crowd favorite insofar as they love the heel, but I don't want to see him as a babyface. I want to see him as a massive main eventer. I want to see him as a world champion, but I'm not interested in babyface Drew McIntyre. I think the better way for him to complete his story is to say, you know what, I didn't get the cheers that I deserved to get when I first became world champion. I don't need them this time. I just need the strap.
On that point, what did you think about his interference after the match, respecting the law of the two competitors, letting them have their bout? Again, a fairly solid showing from those two in Seth Rollins and Jey Uso, and then just demolishing those two. Is there potential on those three having their own triple threat at Royal Rumble for the titles?
I would actually be keen to see something like that, to be honest with you. Potentially with possibility for a title change. Actually, I would see it as a lot more believable in that sort of a situation to have to believe that the title's changing hands. Unfortunately, not for Jey at this point, but I can see Drew making a big point of trying to destroy Jey and getting the pin off him to set up some kind of an angle going into Elimination Chamber with Seth Rollins, just to kind of tie those loose ends before Rollins likely goes up against CM Punk at Mania.
And it would be a huge bit of reversal in fortune from not being on the poster for Royal Rumble to then actually winning one of the world titles there.
Indeed, indeed. And as you'll recall, when we were watching SmackDown, you and I were listing out the people that we considered the main event caliber stars of both shows. And the notable omissions that you and I included, but that were not on the poster, were Drew McIntyre and Kevin Owens. So those were the only two that we missed. Of course, there were some others that they added on that we didn't consider to be main event level. But nevertheless, Drew McIntyre is a stark omission from that Royal Rumble poster. There's a lot of room for everyone.
Sort of getting off the Drew bandwagon for the time being, although, again, I felt he was the MVP for this week's episode. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Cody Rhodes and Shinsuke Nakamura segment. So Cody Rhodes sort of came out, said, okay, I understand he's targeting me now. I've got to put my sights on him. And we got a Nakamura video on the Titantron where he basically says that he feels that they're both on the same story and that he will unburden Cody Rhodes, essentially taking his place in his story and finishing it for himself. In this case, they're both referring to their journey for the World Championship in WWE. So what did you think about this angle on it? And also, how do you feel about them setting up that match for next week's Raw rather than teasing it on for a bigger payoff?
Look, I think that one way to go about this is this very much feels like a detour on the road to WrestleMania, right? Because we know where Cody's heading. We don't exactly know where Shinsuke's heading, but hopefully he'll have a prominent position at Mania as well. But I guess the point of where I'm going with this is that given that it's a detour, it means we can make a couple of stops. Next week does seem too early. I agree with you. I actually would think that a great sort of stipulation for them to go head to head would be on like a New Year's episode or like a brand like first episode of the year sort of thing, just to kind of be like fresh and make it a gimmick match as well, like maybe like a tables match or a falls count anywhere. I think something like that would be especially interesting and a good way to kind of like start that year with your upper to middle of the card. Now, as far as the story, it just seems very consistent with Cody's storyline, and it's almost like in kayfabe. Shinsuke is piggybacking off of that.
Although, to be fair, he did sort of, his whole feud with Rollins was on those lines as well. So it's not like it's completely out of the norm for Shinsuke at this point. Do you think the match next week will be a false finish, so to speak, in the sense that it's not truly the end of their conflict?
I'm actually hoping that it's a false finish, just to lead us to something a bit better, like maybe like a backstage attack at the top of the show or something like that.
Which
just to
we'll
kind of
mention
draw it
later
out a
on
bit.
Dynamite.
Oh, yes, indeed. Which, funnily enough, that's actually what I was hoping would happen too for that situation. But of course, we'll leave the AEW for AEW.
Well, ironically enough, that's all I really had to discuss from Raw. Obviously, there was other matches, the Creed sort of building some momentum against JD and Dominic ahead of their match for the titles. And obviously, there was the 2 out of 3 falls match, DIY versus Imperium. Although I must say, I was a bit disappointed that 2 of those falls were just roll-ups. But that's fine. I think there's more to be told from that angle. So on that note, let's move on to AEW. And we'll start the discussion with what happened on Collision. Thanasi, obviously you are our Collision specialist, so do you want to take the reins here and talk us through your discussion points?
Sure thing. Well, the first discussion point, and well, I've got 2 of them, but the first one deals with the opening contest of the evening, and that's to do with Claudio Castagnoli versus Brody King, where not only did these 2 have a great match, but Brody King won. And this is a big shock because so far he's 2 from 2. He's got a perfect record in the blue group, and both victories are over current or former Ring of Honor World Champions. And it's really putting him in good stead to be like a dark horse victor of this tournament. Do you think that we're likely to see Brody King in the final?
I actually think there is a possibility of it because I was dwelling on this before, and I think if we have time, we might actually go into our discussion on the whole tournament itself. But I was thinking they said that whoever wins it will come back next year and defend their right as the Continental Classic champion. And that immediately said to me, well, if Bryan Danielson's last year as a full-time wrestler is happening, then he probably won't want to have to come back and wrestle a full tournament. So then I thought from the Blue League side, who's likely, and obviously Eddie Kingston's gone through a couple shock losses, and so Brody King all of a sudden seems like he might be that Iceland or that Greece that just comes out of nowhere and is just given the run of his life and makes it all the way to the end potentially. So yeah.
But well, look, I mean that would be cool to see. However, I mean, like I'll get to this a little bit maybe after the second point as well, but essentially where I'm going with this is, and when we talk about the Continental Classic as a whole, for him to come out and already go 2 from 2, and then to potentially not like maybe come second or third in the group, it would kind of feel like a bit of a letdown because it's like, well, he's still shown that he's been very, very strong. So maybe at a future point we can discuss my views on in line with Europa League, Champions League, and Conference League interactions, where second in the group or third in the group still gets something. But we can talk about that at a future point. But yes, indeed, as it stands at the time of that we're referring to, Brody King did get to the top of his group with the 2 from 2. And just to run down some other results before I get to my second talking point from Collision, Abaddon defeated Kiera Hogan, and I believe it was Julia Hart that laid down the challenge. So that seems like that feud's going to happen. Andrade then defeated Daniel Garcia, also in the Continental Classic. They showed respect after the match by honoring the Code of Honor. The Kingdom defeated the Iron Savages. The House of Black defeated Christopher Daniels and Matt Sydal. On the mic afterwards, Black also tried to recruit FTR into his house, but obviously that didn't happen, as you'd expect. Vikingo defeated Kip Sabian with the awesome 630-degree splash. Fantastic look. Which brings us to the main event and my second of two talking points, Bryan Danielson versus Eddie Kingston. So Danielson's first match in the blue group, he hadn't wrestled one before. This was his opening fixture. Eddie had, of course, had a loss. And this was a very hard-fought contest in a very high-tension main event. Eddie even flips off Bryan in defiance towards the end, but he does that right before he succumbs to the psycho knee copped to the head, which gives American Dragon the victory. And all of a sudden, Eddie's future with the gold is in doubt because he's gone 0 from 2, and he is, in a manner of speaking, the defending NJPW openweight and NJPW strong openweight and Ring of Honor world champion. So again, I mean, we said this last week when he lost to Brody King. Technically, Brody should have then become the champion because we thought he was going to be defending it every match. That didn't happen. But again, the champ loses to Bryan Danielson. Likely, do you think that he's going to make a big comeback? Or do you think this is going to be a kind of like a feeling of a downward spiral for Eddie?
I think he will make a comeback because I see the Blue League being a bit more of an evenly matched competition, if that makes sense. I'll get into it a bit with Dynamite, but it feels like on the Blue League that they're more evenly spread. And it feels like, so it might be a situation where 3 wins, which is what Eddie needs at this point, would be just enough. But certainly it's alarming, and we'll see how it progresses. One issue I have with that league is that it's matching up Kingston with Castagnoli. And they recently had what many consider to be like the
blow-off match.
The blow-off match for their feuds, and then having them wrestle again does seem a bit like we're revisiting something that we should have allowed to breathe for a little bit longer.
And exactly to that point, I did do a fact check before, and it is indeed the case that Dragon Lee and Santos Escobar are facing each other in round 1. So you were right.
Well, there you go, guys. We don't need to do them so
We
quickly.
don't need repeat matches so quickly.
All right. Well, on that note, I'm gonna take over and sort of lean into this week's Dynamite.
Yeah.
And the main point I wanted to talk about was the match that I think we're all waiting for, and that was Christian Cage versus Adam Copeland for the TNT Championship.
Yes.
This was obviously a very big match, and it was in Montreal. We were wondering if they would cheer on both of the competitors because they're both Canadian. Turns out, no, they love Copeland and they hate Christian Cage, which is excellent. And I took some notes down. So first, I wanted to note, Copeland opened the match with the 10 beats of the barrel, the drum, the move that Sheamus does. And the commentators, I think they called it sledgehammers. Is that what they said?
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure. But I thought, that's a nice little homage to his mate. And there was some vicious things started from Copeland start before Christian was able to regain control. So like at one point he actually slammed Christian's head repeatedly on the announce desk. And then the first near fall saw Edge's Copeland's spear countered, and then Christian Cage tried to hit his own spear, but that got countered into an impaler. And then Cage at one point jumped over Copeland's spear and actually delivered the kill switch, and that was for another near fall. And then I just wanted to get into the finish, which I thought was a little bit messy. So it had a lot of elements. Firstly, the ref got distracted or got hit, and Christian gave him a punt in the balls, sort of keep him out. He tried to use the TNT title on Copeland, but Copeland managed to avoid it. And then the two both went for spears and in turn sort of barged into each other. And at this point, Nick Wayne's mother came down to the ring and she grabbed the TNT title. She seemed conflicted as to who to hit with it, and eventually she hit Copeland. And then Christian hit a second kill switch. He stomped on Copeland's neck with the title underneath, and then finally pinned him for the win. So I think the right victor emerged from this, but I thought so many things were happening at the end. It felt a little bit like a lot of just too much. At least that's what I felt about it. Was it the same sort of feeling for you?
Yeah, or I think I agree with you. And I think part of that is the fact that they gave the match 15 minutes from or roughly 15 minutes before the hour mark. And it felt like a lot to compress into that kind of a segment. And frankly, with Winter is Coming being next week, they could have saved it for next week. It didn't have to happen today. Ideally on pay-per-view, sure. But even that being said, it could have been done stretched out over maybe more like a 30-minute segment that could have paced it out a little bit better. So I think that's a structural issue or a structural mistake that AEW made on this occasion.
I think it was deliberate though, because my suspicion is they're trying to elongate this so that the payoff is, say, Revolution.
Yep.
The ultimate payoff is obviously is what I mean. I actually would like to see Cage drop the title to someone else, though. I don't think those two need it. And I don't think it does anything for Copeland to win the television title at this point. So those two have enough bitterness between them that you don't need the title at that point. That's my feeling on it.
Yeah. Look, I agree with you. The only issue is that because Christian is doing the best work of his career, it actually is elevating that title.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's giving it that prestige. So whoever he drops it to, it does need to be a big deal, albeit a detour from the Copeland storyline, but it still needs to be a big match.
The way I would do it is have put the rivalry on hold. And AEW is actually fairly good at that sort of thing, where they sort of separate for a little bit and then come back to blows a bit later. I wonder if Copeland's going to take a week off or two now that he got stomped on the neck, which is supposed to be a vulnerable. Yeah, because it's meant to be a vulnerable spot for him as well. Yeah. But anyway, let's move on to the supposed real world champion, the main, which is the stuff with MJF. First, I wanted to talk about this backstage interview segment he had with Renee that sort of basically turned into a confrontation with Adam Page. Now, a lot of people really liked this, and this was where Adam Page essentially got accused by MJF as being the devil, and Page sort of reciprocated and said, "Well, if, there's as much reason to believe you're the devil as there is to believe I am." And it sort of seemed like there was a bit of animosity here, and Samoa Joe of all people had to come in and split them up. I saw online people were getting very hot at this, the idea of those two facing each other. And then I saw other comments saying, well, how many goddamn feuds does MJF have to have at any one time?
How many storylines?
Yeah. Which, again, because I was counting them. So obviously he's got the stuff going on with Samoa Joe right now. He's got little beefs going on with Roderick Strong and the Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
This supposed Adam Page thing, the devil, Wardlow. Like, it does seem like he's got a lot on his plate.
And also he has to be keeping in touch with his best friend, Adam Cole.
Oh, of course. And, mind you, he's got the bidding war of 2024 to think about.
So with all these things in mind, how the hell does not one of these angles make it into the main event of Dynamite?
On most weeks, I agree with you, but with what happened this week, I think we can give them a pass.
We can give them a pass for this week, but it's a recurring offense.
What I wonder is if they're not going to close the show, why not open with them?
He has opened the show though.
He has, but I mean, in this case, I think it would have been a really strong way because, especially in what happened, which we'll get into now, which is Samoa Joe came out ready for the tag match that they were meant to have against the Masked Men. But before MJF could come out, the lights started flickering and we saw the Masked Men surround the ring while Joe was in the middle. And then it went to black and we saw the devil on the Titantron. And then they revealed MJF laid out in the back. So they didn't have the match at all. Joe had to run all the way to sort of check on not his friend, but the piece of meat that he's grooming for their eventual match. So what are your thoughts on all this stuff that they're building now between the Devil and MJF and with Joe stuck in the middle, like, is this creatively satisfying for you as a fan watching?
Look, I think we're at the point now where we need something else. And what I mean by that is I think we need at least some kind of a clue or more information, because they've been doing a more teasing of the Devil storyline, but not with more capacity for us to speculate on who it is. And I think I've heard from the rumor mills that they know who the people are, they know who the masked men are. So maybe we do need to actually make more of an effort here. But to be quite honest with you, dragging it out too far past World's End might risk it just kind of growing cold and getting stale. That's my view.
I agree, and it's also the thing I'm worried about now is who could it possibly be that it lives up to the potential? And I'm starting to think that your initial suspicion of it being Adam Cole could potentially be the only reveal that actually elicits a positive reaction out of the crowd, which would be why? How could you? You know, like it would actually make people feel something. Whereas I think anyone else it is at this point. Some people obviously theorizing potentially Jack Perry. I think that one would be good in the sense that I could actually see it happen, but you just worry that Jack Perry doesn't have the heel star power yet.
Here's my question for you, and this is a genuine one. Do you think that AEW Creative has selected someone and we're just drawing it out until the opportune moment? Or do you think that they still haven't chosen who it's going to be and it's just yet to be unnamed perpetrator?
That's a very good question. I think they have chosen who it is, but they've underestimated the reaction that they need to get from it. Like I don't think they foresaw the idea of, okay, this will actually draw people in, but obviously the more weeks we build up to it, then the more we're sort of building up the idea of who it will eventually be. I think it's the problem with any sort of masked person, is that it kind of has to be an oh my god or how could you moment. It has to be thematically pleasing or satisfying.
Yeah.
And I just worry that in this case it might not be.
I'll make like a Friends analogy, where if you recall in season 1, when Hank Azario's character, David, he's asked by Phoebe, he goes, do you plan to kiss me at any point? And he goes, oh, yes, but I've just been putting it so long and I've just been building it up in my mind so much that now what I would have to do is just like fling all the things off my desk, put you onto the desk and then kiss you. So it's almost as that we are actually at that point now where anything less than something like that is going to be just going to feel like it's going to fall flat. And I feel like we're dangerously close to that at the moment.
I agree. All right, well, I'm going to quickly get into a bit of the other results as well. So Toni Storm defended her Women's World Championship successfully against Sky Blue, and this saw afterwards the return of the first ever AEW Women's World Champion, and that was Riho. I wasn't watching intently around that time, so for me, obviously, it didn't land the same way, but the crowd seemed excited about it, and we'll see how that plays out. And the rest, Roderick Strong got out of his wheelchair. My God, well done to him. And he says this wheelchair has held him back far too long, and then repeated far too long. So I think there's obviously something sinister going on with Roderick Strong and the Kingdom. We'll wait to see where that leads. Some people are theorizing they are among the masked men.
That would be cool. I'd be down for that.
It could be cool. I'd like to see them treat it though very seriously, because they are entertaining. But if they're going to turn it up, then they might as well go full blown heel. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is what's going on with the Continental Classic. So we had 3 very good matches. I think Swerve and Mark Briscoe really engaged the audience the most out of these 3.
Yeah.
Moxley beat Rush to go. So now Moxley's on 9 points. Rush is on 3. Swerve beat Mark Briscoe. So Swerve's on 9 points. Mark Briscoe is eliminated. and he's on because he's only on 0. And Jay White beat Jay Lethal.
Is Jay out as well?
Jay Lethal
Jay
is now
Lethal?
out. He's now out.
Okay.
So now we've only got 3 left, and this is what I wanted to talk about a little bit with the format. Is it feels like Lethal and Briscoe have been made the jobbers for this tournament for the other 3 to excel, and it's something that I have an issue with. Is I think the match quality is all there, but with those 3 matches every week taking up every episode of Dynamite, it kind of feels like you're donating an hour of your programming to the one angle.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one concern I have with the format of the tournament, is that you're putting so much TV time towards the Continental Classic, which we still don't know if it has further repercussions, further implications. We know that you win these titles, but AEW does not present the Ring of Honor title and the New Japan Strong Openweight title as their most important. They present the World Championship and the TNT Championship right now. So it kind of feels like, is this just winning as in is an honor? Do you get a title match at Revolution? Like, what's going on? So it's an issue that I have with the format, is that so much TV time is being put towards it, and it almost feels like they want the tournament itself to just feel important. And that's obviously a very hard thing to do right from the outset. How do you feel about it? And also, is it working for you, the way it's been presented?
Well, the way that it's been presented to me is the biggest word that comes to mind is there's potential, because I'm making comparisons between this and the G1 climax. And not only that, I'm also just making comparisons, like I said before, with, the Champions League, the Europa League, the Conference League, World Cup models. Now, I think when I think of this, it's taking place in a period of a very short amount of time. So we're talking about 5 weeks or so, which is more reminiscent of the G1 climax model or the World Cup model. However, if I can just indulge me here and endorse the UEFA model, drag this over a longer period of time. Make this, say, post one pay-per-view leading up to the next big 4 pay-per-view, because I know they've introduced the small ones now, and say make it, I don't know, like a full, what do we just have? Full gear up to Revolution rather than full gear up to World's End. Drag it out, and that would also alleviate the pressure where you could have 2 group stage matches every episode, which is basically what's happening on Collision anyway, instead of the 3. And then with the model, I believe it is the case that they're going to have like a semi-final deals where they've got league finals. So they're going to have the top 2 face off in the gold group and the top 2 face off in the blue group. That is kind of good, but I would prefer that maybe we had, I don't know, like some kind of a reward for 3rd place. So I guess the way that I envision it, say for future iterations, is maybe the group winners face off for a world championship match at Revolution, and that determines number 1 contendership. And then the group runners up face off, say, for the like for the TNT title or something like that. You can combine in there then, like the drop down model from the Champions League going to Europa League. So say that we had semi-finals. So top 2 from each group engage in semi-finals. The winners face off for a world title number 1 contendership. The losers battle against 3rd place, and they can go then for a television title match. Basically, I think one of the ways we can actually make this better is to make it bigger, because right now we've got 6 and 6. The G1 Climax has got, I think, a total of 32, like nearly triple. So there's a lot of room to grow with this. It just depends how much they want to commit to it. But I think there's a lot of potential with this sort of group stage tournament style.
I quite like those suggestions. And it doesn't even have to be like the TNT title, could be the international championship, whatever they wanted to do as like the secondary option. I quite like that. The thing that you brought up that concerns me a little bit is the idea of the semi-finals within each league before they meet in the final. And the only reason that concerns me is that it's going to necessitate a rematch.
Indeed. Indeed.
And when you've just had a tournament where the premise is you each fight each other, and then whoever comes out on top in your respective leagues meets in the final, kind of feels like, well, why is it that two people get the chance to face off one more time rather than just have each other? Like in football, there's the home and away premise. So you face each other, and it's like it sort of keeps the conditions as fair as possible. So you have one chance in your own ground and one chance in theirs. In wrestling, they don't really need that. So wrestling the one time over a league format should be sufficient.
There's also that, and then it could, like, you can still retain a semi-final model, but just have like an alternation. So it's whoever comes first in the blue group wrestles the second one in the gold group.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's a very common thing in all knockout sport as well. So I think that could be done.
See, that in itself, like that to me screams as a more interesting idea, because then you can even have the idea be, when we're talking about Eddie Kingston and can he pull it off, say he finishes second and he's one win behind the eventual winner of the Blue League, and he has to face a guy like Moxley, his mate and a very strong competitor, and to retain his titles essentially has to pull off the upset of his career. So that actually lends itself to even more of like that underdog premise, that fighting back, clawing back into the tournament. But I think we're in agreement that the Continental Classic is a promising idea, and it just needs more time, a bit more not thought, because they have thought about it, but that idea of improving upon
a bit more refinement.
Yeah,
the model is still valid. We can just perfect certain parts of it.
I particularly like your idea about increasing the talent pool because it doesn't even have to be 32; it could be 16.
Yeah,
and just work off that. I think that could also be really.
And in fact, 16 might be better because these are quite large groups, and exactly like you were saying, that in the minimum amount of time required, 3 weeks, Jay Lethal and Mark Briscoe are already mathematically out, and they've still got to wrestle 2 more matches that for them are going to be dead brothers. Whereas if you do, say, smaller groups of maybe groups of 4, where you wrestle 3 group stage matches, you don't have that, or you have a smaller likelihood of that dead brother match having to occur.
Well, I think that's quite a stimulating conversation about the Continental Classic. I feel quite happy now to actually air out our thoughts about it. I think up until now we've sort of just been viewing it and not being given that chance to really dive into it.
There's been a lot of stuff going on in wrestling lately.
Yes, there has. And well, that brings us to the end of this week's edition of the Audible Finish. But as you mentioned, a lot of things are happening. Next week, we'll be reviewing CM Punk's appearances on SmackDown and Raw. And it seems like we're being promised that he will sign with one of these brands. So we will know this time next week who he's with, whether it's with Raw or SmackDown. So plenty to look forward to, plenty to tune in for. And there'll obviously be the fallout, if we're looking at AEW, on what happened with the TNT Championship and potential further developments going on with the world title picture, and more revealed with the Continental Classic. We've got Swerve Strickland facing Jon Moxley next week on Dynamite. So that's probably considered one of the blockbusters of the Gold League.
Tasty.
Yes, very much so. So plenty to tune in for. We'll be here to review all of the action next week. Thanasi, great to have your company as always.
Thanks for having me. That was actually a very, very pleasant conversation.
And surprising, isn't it?
Yes.
And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Until next time, we hope everything you do is just too sweet.